we go. Our learning goals for these 2 hours. So understand how to read a stack trace, understand common error messages, understand how to use pry to create breakpoints in code to help verify assumptions, and then this last one here, develop a debugging process. So our hope is that once we finish up these 2 hours, you all feel a little bit more comfortable debugging any errors or failures that you get, and that you feel a little bit more comfortable using pry to do those things. So with that debugging process, I kind of mentioned these 2 words just now. There are 2 ways that programming can go wrong. You can either get an error, which I'm sure all of you have had by now. So an error meaning you hit like a little snag in your code, big snag, I guess, it's an error, not a failure, and it wasn't able to run. So it popped you out of that test suite, and we would consider that to be an error, so it does not run. The second one, they're a failure. So your program runs, but it doesn't work the way you expected it to. So it was able to complete running, and it didn't kick you out. It was able to run, but you probably saw this a lot with whenever you're doing like an assert equal and it's saying expected this, but I got this. It was able to run, it was able to get something, but it wasn't exactly what you were expecting to get. We would consider that to be a failure. And when you're running your tests, it does show up with either that like E or F. I think some of you have probably seen that already. If not, I'll make sure to point that out today so we can see how to identify an error versus a failure. And you all have access to these slides. You'll see I'm going to go through some of this kind of quickly because there are a few notes that I think would be beneficial to keep written down somewhere, but I might not spend enough time on each slide to get you all, so that each of you all have time to write it all down. So just know you have access to those slides. I posted that in your channel. So steps for debugging. First one, I feel like this is something that I need to do a better job at demonstrating when I'm with you all. I think that you all will kind of get to this point too, and if you haven't already, of just like seeing a few words in an error or failure message, and you're like, oh shoot, I know what to do, and then you go and take care of it. It's like it looks familiar, and so the hope is that these start looking familiar. I never want to get to a point where you all memorize these. Like I would say, we'll go over some like common errors or failures that you might see. I don't think that it's something that you need to put on flashcards and like test your knowledge on what exactly an error or a failure message is saying. I think what we're trying to get at is you're able to read an error message or read a failure message and be able to go through this debugging process. Not so much a like, okay, right away, I know what to do. Based off of a memorization that maybe you came up with. Because what you'll notice is a lot of these error messages don't always mean the same thing. And we'll see that today. So read your whole error when you get one. And again, I'll try and do a better job at doing that because I think just having gone through Mod 1 and seeing these errors, I think I skip over them quickly. So that's a good reminder to myself. Read your stack trace, find the error. So the stack trace we'll talk about, it's kind of like I'd say it's like a pathway to identify where your error is. And again, we'll go over that as well. Verify your assumptions. So make sure the stuff that you think is working or should be working is actually working before you jump into where you think the error might be. And a lot of this like verification of your assumptions goes within the test that you've created. Make sure that the objects that you created were created accurately, because sometimes you can get like really far in the debugging process to later find out that, oh, it was just like a silly issue that I forgot to pass a certain argument in when creating an object, or just something that like was really small that you could have taken care of quickly. So verifying that what you think should be working is actually working. And then this last one here is kind of vague. Try things out. And we'll go through kind of these steps for debugging in a few different examples here. Before we get into kind of defining what stack trace is and verifying your assumptions and just like trying things out, I do want to just run through some common errors that you might see. Again, you all have access to these slides, so you are welcome to go through this at any time that you need. Also, I think it's a good resource for when we do breakout rooms later and you run into some of these errors. So this first one, we have a name error, uninitialized constant, some class, some constant. So when you see something like this, This is kind of like the translation that I put here for you to kind of like first think as to what might be the issue here. So Ruby does not know what some constant is. The class you're referring to has not been created. So you might get this if you've created a file for, let's say you had a dog class, and I feel like I've used that example quite a lot. You had a dog class and you didn't actually define a class in there. So that hasn't been defined. You're trying to refer to a class that you actually haven't defined yet. Undefined local variable or method X for some object, and that X here I just have in place of whatever method or variable that you might be trying to call. So anytime you see this, and it says it here, undefined local variable or method. And we talked about this a little bit in the scope class. We saw this error come up quite a bit when we were going over scope. And I think y'all probably seen this quite a bit in just working through your project as well. But Ruby, when it finds something that it does not recognize, it's going to first look for a local variable called that. And if it can't find a local variable, then it's going to look for a method called that. And if it can't find either of those, then that's when this error is going to pop up. So Ruby doesn't know what X is, whatever your X was. Maybe it was like an add talent method or something like that, and we never defined it, or there was no variable called that. It's looking for a method X and a local variable X, and it couldn't find either. No option for it there. This third one, wrong number of arguments given X, expected Y. This is one that I think we saw pretty early on in one of Kat's lessons last week. So you called a method with X number of arguments, but the method definition specifies it needs Y number of arguments. So let's go along with that add talent example that I just said. If we had something that was like def add talent, we give it a talent to be able to add to its collection of talents, and we tried saying, hey, dog, let's add talent, and we never passed it anything. It might say something like, hey, I was expecting 1 because your method has a placeholder there, but you didn't actually give it 1. So just an argument issue there. Syntax error. These next two can be pretty frustrating. So syntax error, unexpected end of input, expecting keyword end. This can occur for multiple reasons, which is kind of why I don't want you all to get into that habit of memorizing what these mean. And the main reasons that I see this pop up, I wrote down here. So missing like a literal end, the word end, or it could be even like a closing bracket or closing parenthesis. It could be even a comma. So it's just kind of like expecting a character but couldn't find it. A lot of times it will give you the last line of the class for where the error occurred, which is why this can be pretty frustrating. It'll like maybe you're missing an end in the middle of your class somewhere. Let's say you have 100 lines in your class and it says missing an end on line 100, but you're actually missing the end somewhere in between. Usually with these errors, it just gives you that last line. So it can get pretty frustrating to try and find where that end is. All it knows is that it was able to match up ends up until that last line 100, and then it couldn't find one. Hope, did you have a question?
It's less of a, I've seen that happen a lot with methods where you didn't quite give it what it was expecting to.
Can you go into that a little more? Give an example.
I don't know, more or less just like it is a syntax error in the sense that like you didn't quite give it what it thought it was supposed to get as far as the syntax goes, and it spits that out too.
Yeah, this, like I said, this one does come up for multiple reasons, and I think we can kind of go along too with what Hope said of just like it's expecting something to kind of finish this up, but it finished whatever piece of code that you had up, but it wasn't able to find it, and that can be for multiple reasons. Similar to this next one of unexpected keyword end, meaning like the other one was it wasn't there, and now this one is there's too many. So this could be like you have an extra end, you have an extra parenthesis, you have an extra closing bracket, and that's just a few reasons why. Again, I think this will have the same issue with just giving you like that last line. So it's not very descriptive on where that issue is. Two more. Require cannot load such file. So Ruby cannot load the file. Usually this is for a few different reasons. One, maybe you misspelled it. Two, maybe you gave the wrong file path and it can't find it. Or three, maybe you're running it from the wrong directory. Maybe you like have required it correctly, but you're just running it from the wrong directory. And so it's not able to find that path relative to where you're running that file from. And then this last one here, undefined method, whatever the method's name is, for some object or some class. So it's a no method error essentially, meaning you try to call some method on an object, but that object doesn't respond to that method. So what I usually think of when I see a no method error is that I'm trying to call a method, or kind of like what I just said there, trying to call a method on an object that doesn't know of that method. So I would check first to make sure that I have that method within that class that I'm trying to call it on. So again, just running through those like common ones that I think a lot of y'all have seen before. You have access to these through the slides, so you can come back to them at any time. But at this point right now, are there any questions on some of these common errors that have come up? Ian, we have a guest.
Hello. I got a quick question, Meg. Sorry. So on the slide, it says this is number 8 that you've covered. I only saw 7. Were these just misnumbered, or did I actually miss one?
I might have misnumbered them. 1, 2,
Okay, just
3,
checking.
4, 5.
6. Okay.
Yes.
All right, just checking that I didn't miss one. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Ian, do you want to introduce yourself? You just popped into the class. No one knows you.
Hi, I'm Ian. I teach backend mod 3. Meg and I have taught together in the past in mod 2 and I think mod 1. Did we teach mod 1 together?
We taught mod 1, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we kind of like move around from mod to mod. And as part of our accreditation, we're sitting in and kind of observing each other's classes. So Meg is going to come sit in on one of my classes on Friday. So I'm just here to observe and make some notes. And that's pretty much it.
Cool. Thanks, Ian.
Hello.
All right. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into an example here. And I want to go through kind of a debugging process that I would go through using this erroneous creatures repo that I sent out to you all. You do not need to follow along yourselves, but if you would like to for this, you're welcome to. I'll give you time in your breakout groups to try some of this on your own as well. Before jumping into that example that I want to do with you all, I want to go over just this idea of what a stack trace is. So let me pull up. Here we go. Cool. All right, so this is our erroneous creatures right now. And I'm going to start with going through, if any of y'all, just to give you kind of like a little background to what this is, this may look very familiar to those of you that have worked on some mythical creatures before. Very similar to mythical creatures, there's just a few extra errors thrown into this one for the sake of this lesson. And so some of these errors, if you've already done the mythical creatures, some of these may be very familiar and others may be pretty new to you all. So in this test, I'm gonna do the Hobbit one first, just to get an idea for like, what is the stack trace that we're talking about? So I'm gonna run this test, Hobbit test. And I can see as soon as I run this, if I take a look, I have finished, it tells me the time it ran in. There were 9 runs, so there are 9 tests there. I have 0 assertions, 0 failures, 1 error I can see, and then I'm skipping the rest, which is you'll notice in this repo that I have a lot of tests that are skipped. You don't need to unskip any of them. It's for the sake of this lesson. You don't need to worry about the tests that are skipped. Excuse me, that are skipped. So taking a look at this 1 error that we have, if I scroll up, you can see it right here in red. So I can see these were the tests that I kind of skipped over, and then the one that I did want to run, I have an error on. So looking at this first part, I see error, I can identify it's an error, it's not a failure, and it's in Hobbit test. So the class Hobbit test, if I go ahead and open this Hobbit test up, it's referring to this class of Hobbit test that it's in. And then it shows you here the method in which that error is occurring. So the test method, and all these are skipped except for this one, but if I see test can get tired if play 3 times. Here we go, this last one here. So test can get tired if play 3 times. So this is where I think I'm going to be looking at. But to get a better idea for what this issue is, now I'm going to jump into what we call the stack trace. So everything here I would consider to be the stack trace. And when we talk about stack trace, what we're talking about is this right here. So the stack trace shows what line of code an error occurred on and all the method calls that led up to that error. So before I mentioned that it's kind of like it gives you a pathway to where that error occurred. So I want to kind of dissect this stack trace first before diagnosing what the error is. So jumping back into this, I can see right underneath where I call, or where it tells me where this error is occurring or what test has the error in. I can see the actual kind of error method that we just went over, those like very common error messages that we get. And I can see this very common error message, no method error. So undefined method, this greater than or equal sign for nil class. So I'm unable to call this, whatever this is getting called on, it looks like, is a nil object, nil class. But to get a better idea for it, let's jump into this stack trace. So looking at the stack trace, if we go to the very bottom first, we can see kind of the pathway it took to get to where that error is. So I want to go from the bottom up to be able to diagnose, or to be able to just kind of like dissect this at first. So test can get tired if play 3 times. If I'm looking at this whole thing right here. In my Hobbit test, on line 74, so right here, on line 74 in my Hobbit test, test can get tired if played 3 times. So this is showing me that on line 74 of this test, this is where this issue first starts coming up. And then I go to the next line here. So still, in that Hobbit test, on line 74, more specifically in that times method, gets me closer to where that error happens. So 3 dot times, okay. So now I'm here at this like little times here, this method times, which is going to run this block of code 3 times. And then I can see here on this line 75, block in test can get tired of play 3 times. So on line 75, within this block, so it went from, okay, it's in this test, okay, it happened when I called this method, okay, it's actually happening within this block from which I called that method, which it tells me it's on this line in that block. If I keep going up, I can see this next one here is saying, now I get this different path that takes me to my Hobbit class. You can see hobbit.rb in my lib folder, on line 22 in play. It got there because I have this dot play that I'm calling on line 75. That brings me up to my Hobbit class. Let's flip this. Play method on line 22. So now I'm going to take a look over here. Play method, line 22. Okay, so it got to my play method. Now it's having an issue here. What is this issue doing? Or sorry, what is this line doing? It's calling this adult method. And you can even see in the stack trace here, this is kind of like where it finally located where the problem was happening. And if I go to line 18 in my Hobbit class, again, it got called from line 22. Line 18, I can see this is where it's having that issue. And I know I just walked through that on my own, but I want to see, just by show of hands, is there anyone here that can look at kind of what we have right here, what I have highlighted, and tell me what's the issue I'm having here? Why is this erroring out? Yes, a lot of hands. Shonda.
You have an extra E in age.
Yeah. extra E and H. So I just went through a lot in that stack trace to find that little spelling error. If I run this again, let's go ahead and run this whole test. Now I can see that one that I don't have skipped is passing. So it really was just that spelling error there. Best practice when looking through this stack trace, when you're getting to that, when you're trying to debug, I would actually start, what I did with you all is I started at the bottom and I went up, which is kind of like going from the outside in and like narrowing it down. I would actually start narrow and then work your way up, because I would say it's more likely that your issue comes from that like very narrow part where it's saying the error is occurring than it is at that very outside place. So I would actually start here, in which case if we started there, we probably would have been able to find this issue a lot quicker, right? That's where we found it when we finally got to that last, or in this case, the first part of the stack trace. But from the outside inside, it took us getting all the way to this one here to be able to find where that error was. Whereas if we started there, it would have probably been a lot quicker. I see a few hands up. I don't know if we didn't take them down. Can you take your hand down if you don't have a question, but if you still have a question, keep it up. Will.
I have nothing, sorry.
You're fine. Taylor.
So am I understanding correctly then that if the error occurred in play, it would still be showing you adult, or would it end? I guess I'm trying to understand why. I know you were saying to start like narrowly, but what would be the purpose of even looking at the rest of it if it's telling you that something's wrong just in adult? Like, why is it giving you everything else?
Yeah, so it's going to give you everything else if there were methods that led up to getting there. And you'll see in some of these other examples, the error doesn't always occur in that final, or in this case, I keep saying final because we just started on the outside and went, or started at the end and went up, but it doesn't always occur in this place right here. It could have been possibly in the setup of your objects that you're having the issue with. And I think we'll see a few other examples to help answer that question, Taylor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I guess kind of going back to kind of like what this error was in the first place. Why was it saying, why were we getting this? Why did it say undefined method greater than or equal to for nil class? This is how it was. We identified that this was the issue. It was a spelling issue. But why did it consider that to be a nil class? Mike?
I don't know if it's the right answer, but
Okay.
it was spelt wrong. It wasn't recognized as like an object or a class.
Yeah, it wasn't recognized as an object or class. If I went ahead in here, I have not yet fixed my alias for this. Okay, so if I put my pry in here, and let's say I run this test again, and I put my pry here because I know that it's going to error out right here, and I want to put my pry before I know it's going to have an error. So I put my pry there, and I want to check what is this like at AGEE. It's nil, right? It's an object that has never been defined before. So when I tried calling this greater than or equal to 32, that's where we got this method error, no method error, saying this method right here, which is a Ruby method, a comparison method, greater than or equal to, we can't call it on something that's nil. How do we compare something that's nil to the number 32? It's not greater than or equal to, it's not a number, so we can't compare it. So that's where this issue originally came from. So since it's never been defined before, that's why it came back as nil. Cool. Okay, let's go ahead, let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break. I'll put a timer up here for you all. And when you come back, I'm going to give some directions before we jump into breakout groups to try and follow these stack traces on your own. So 5 minutes. I'll be back once that timer's off. I can see if I know that Kat and Mike have both been playing music, and I have been late to the music game. So let's see if we can figure this out.
Thank you, 31. 31? 31.
31. Thanks, Hope.
And Sean said in the chat, don't
If you're
forget to
gonna
stop
tell
recording.
them everything,
Thank you.
tell them I'm a good kisser. Tell 'em